Morning, Bill here with the Metals Minute. Today is Monday, September 26, 2022. Huge weekend. Over the weekend, just recently was announced the new leader of Italy. Many call her an extreme right-wing person, but in today's culture, all that means is that she promotes family values, God, country, that kind of stuff. But that's considered extreme by some on the extreme other way, which had become more mainstream. Anyway, why is that important? It's important because she challenges the whole structure of the globalism and the efforts of the woke culture to try to overturn just traditional norms, and she's challenging that whole notion. And one of the reasons economically it's important is some of the people that she is aligned with have publicly stated in the past that they believe the war between Russia and Ukraine was largely due to the encroachment of NATO and, poking the bear, so to speak. And that's those are things that are known by many people, or at least discussed in private, but few people say it publicly because it's not the acceptable view. And so having that view, that's important because Italy, of all the nations in Europe, they are the most dependent upon natural gas for their electricity production. Over half of their energy comes from natural gas, including their electricity, not just natural gas for heat, but for utilities. And so there's a possible likelihood, more so than would have been in the past, that they will try to work out some kind of a deal with Russia. And that could further fracture the EU. It could just create a lot of issues. Incidentally, wood pellets were a hot item before in Europe. Now they're starting to see inflation among wood pellets. They're raising 2 and 3 times the price. And that impacts us here in the United States because a lot of the wood pellets they use in Europe, they don't produce. They come from huge wood mills and wood pellet operations that are down in the southeastern United States. Large tracts of land have been just being clear cut, and that wood being pelletized and put on transport headed straight to the docks to be shipped to Europe. And so not a lot of Americans are aware of that, but that's a resource that's been dedicated, a lot of that, to Europe, and so that may influence our prices here. So if you use a wood pellet stove or anything like that, you might want to go buy yourself some before the price increase hits us here as well. So those are things happening in energy. Now let's talk about the British pound. Overnight it's fallen to a record low level. In fact, if we look at the British pound over the last 200 years compared to the exchange rate with the dollar, the last time it was even close to this level is during the Plaza Accords back in the early 80s, when we had all the currency upheavals at that time. And that's significant because it's just one more indicator that we're in a similar place economically and financially that we were during the great period of stagflation in the 70s and early 80s. And that created a lot of currency upheavals worldwide. And the Plaza Accords were a coming together of Western nations, and where the United States had to, or didn't have to, but they agreed to do something to lower the value of the dollar because it was wreaking such havoc with other trading partners' currencies worldwide. And it's very possible we could see something similar occur again because that same issue is happening now. The dollar index is up over 20% for the year, and it's at a record level against other Western currencies. So we may see that dip down. Incidentally, that will impact the price of gold for us here in America. Now, while the British pound is sinking to the lowest level ever compared to the dollar, measured in gold, gold is up over 10% measured in British pounds. So that illustrates what we've been trying to talk about, why it's important for us as Americans now to purchase gold and silver while the dollar is valued high on an international scene, because that gives us more purchasing power for metal than what they have in their own countries now. Now, that will not always be that way. In fact, it appears by those that look at charts and technical analysis that that dollar is peaking and beginning to show signs of coming back down, and especially if we have something similar to the Plaza Accord again, and that's where they try to get it to come down. So when that happens, the dollar price of gold will rise. So we're able to buy metal now while our dollars are valued high on the international scene. Measured against gold and silver, it's not that impactful. And so we'll get most of the bump from the currency as the dollar comes back down to earth, one way or another. And of course, the election will play into that, how much they'll allow it. You know, they'll probably try to optimize the value of the dollar for whatever impact they feel will there'll be perhaps for the election, or at least it'll be one consideration, maybe not the primary one. So there's a lot that remains to be seen. But for our international friends, times like these are showing the importance of having precious metals. Incidentally, there's one currency that is continuing to grow against the dollar versus most other currencies are lower, and that's the Russian ruble. And in fact, of most of the nations have recently raised interest rates or announced plans to raise them over the last week. Russia is an exception. Over the weekend and early morning this morning, we hear that they're going to lower the interest rates. And inflation is, while it's always a concern in Russia, it's lower there than in many Western countries. And so that's one currency. Now, why is that? Because they have tangible assets and they have energy. And so that's an important consideration for us as well. It's not only good to have financial assets, it's good to have tangible assets. And when things begin to get crazy, if you have lower debt and you have more tangible wealth in that way, even when times are topsy-turvy worldwide, you can still be supported and have a stable base when, in their case, they have a lot of energy as well as other commodities and natural resources. As American citizens, we can, by owning precious metals, we have tangible assets. And that's something that gives you a little diversity away from the real estate market, which in many sectors in the United States are now under great pressure to come down. One final point, the chartists among us and those that are technical analysts, when they look at the U.S. markets and precious metals, they're seeing the signs of similar to when we had a 10-year bear market in stocks where they kind of just basically went a little bit up and down, but mostly sideways for 10 years, and a 10-year bull market for precious metals. And so there's several confirmations, several indicators that make things look very similar to what how they looked in the early to mid 70s to early 80s, in that time frame when gold and silver had such a run up. So far this morning we've got 3 of the 4 metals up, and it feels like they have based out and maybe headed back up over the next few months. So stay tuned. We'll keep you informed. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.